In the spring of 1904, a magazine called Electrical World and Engineer published an article by the most famous inventor alive. In it, he described a system that would transmit electrical power through the Earth itself to any point on the planet, with no wires, no transmission lines, and no meter standing between the source and your home. He had already built the tower to do it. It stood 187 feet tall on the north shore of Long Island, capped by a 55-ton steel dome sunk 120 feet into the ground. The man was Nikola Tesla. The article was titled, "The Transmission of Electrical Energy Without Wires." And within 3 years, the tower would be silent, the funding gone, and the single most ambitious energy project in American history abandoned on a quiet stretch of New York coastline. Here is what almost no one tells you about that tower. It was not a fantasy. It was not a sketch. It was poured concrete and forged steel, financed by the richest banker in the world, designed by the architect who built the New York Public Library. The physics behind it had already been demonstrated, at full scale, in a laboratory in Colorado 2 years earlier. And the reason it vanished has nothing to do with whether it worked. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what Tesla built, what he proved in the Colorado desert before he ever broke ground in New York, and the precise moment a single sentence in a letter killed the project. Then I am going to show you why the structure of the electricity business made certain it could never be allowed to succeed. But first, you need to understand what the man actually claimed, because once you understand the claim, you will understand exactly why it terrified the people funding it. The year is 1900. Tesla is 44 years old and already a legend. The alternating current system that lights every city in America is his. The induction motor turning in every factory is his. He has more money and more credibility than almost any inventor who has ever lived. And he walks into the office of J. Pierpont Morgan, the man who controls more capital than the United States Treasury, with a proposal. He does not ask for money to build a better light bulb. He asks for money to build a global wireless system that will transmit not just messages, but raw electrical power to anywhere on Earth. Morgan gives him $150,000. In today's money, that is more than $5 million, and construction begins at a site called Wardenclyffe, near the village of Shoreham on Long Island. Tesla did not choose that name by accident, and he did not choose a small architect. He hired Stanford White, the most celebrated architect in America, the man behind the original Madison Square Garden and the Washington Square Arch. White designed the tower and the brick laboratory building beside it, a structure with a 187-foot chimney and a power plant that Tesla intended to fill with the largest electrical apparatus ever assembled for commercial use. This was not a backyard experiment dressed up for investors. The most famous inventor in the world had hired the most famous architect in the world, and the most famous banker in the world had paid for it. Every person at the top of that project was the best in the country at what they did. Keep that in mind, because the people who tell you this was a crank's daydream are describing a project that the era's most serious men staked their reputations on. Now, to understand why Morgan wrote that check, you have to understand what Tesla had already done in Colorado, because Wardenclyffe was not a guess. It was the second act. In 1899, Tesla had moved to Colorado Springs and built an experimental station at an altitude of 6,000 feet, where the thin, dry air made high-voltage work easier. He chose the location deliberately, near the foot of Pikes Peak, in a region famous for violent and frequent electrical storms. He wanted lightning. He intended to study it up close, at a scale no one had attempted. Inside that wooden building, he constructed the largest Tesla coil ever made, a device he called the magnifying transmitter. It was 52 feet in diameter. When he energized it, it produced artificial lightning bolts measured at 135 feet long, the longest man-made electrical discharges that had ever been created. The crack of the discharge was reportedly heard 15 miles away. Sparks jumped from the ground to the shoes of anyone walking nearby. He burned out the generator at the local El Paso Power Company and plunged the entire town into darkness, and he had to rebuild their dynamo himself to be allowed to continue. But the spectacle was not the point. While he was there, Tesla recorded something in his notebooks that became the entire foundation of Wardenclyffe. After a particular thunderstorm passed over the station and moved away into the distance, he observed that his instruments registered the electrical disturbance in repeating, regular pulses, growing and fading as the storm receded. He interpreted this as evidence of standing waves of electrical activity moving through the Earth itself, the planet ringing electrically like a struck bell. He became convinced that the Earth could be made to resonate at a specific frequency, and that if you pumped energy into the ground at exactly that frequency, the entire planet would act as a single conductor, and that energy could be drawn back out at any other point on its surface. He believed he had measured the Earth's natural electrical period. Whether his interpretation was correct is still debated by physicists today, and that debate matters, so hold on to it. But the measurements were real. The notebooks survive. They were eventually published, and the confidence he carried back to New York was total. He had not merely theorized wireless power. He believed he had witnessed the Earth itself confirming it. So in 1901, Morgan's money in hand, Tesla begins building the tower that will turn that observation into a working global system. And this is where the story turns, because Tesla makes a decision that will cost him everything. When Tesla pitched Morgan, the headline application was wireless transmission of information across the Atlantic, a competitor to the undersea telegraph cables. This mattered enormously to Morgan, because in 1901, while Wardenclyffe was still under construction, a young Italian named Guglielmo Marconi successfully transmitted a wireless signal, the letter S, across the Atlantic Ocean. Marconi did it with simpler, cheaper equipment, and he did it first. The commercial justification Tesla had sold to Morgan, beating the cable companies to wireless messaging, was suddenly being achieved by someone else for a fraction of the cost. Morgan had funded a cathedral, and a competitor had just built a working chapel down the road in half the time. But messaging was never what Tesla cared about. Power transmission was the real goal, and it always had been. And as construction dragged on, as costs ballooned past the original budget, as Marconi's success made the messaging angle look like a lost race, Tesla wrote to Morgan and revealed his true ambition. He was not building a better telegraph. He was building a system that would deliver electrical energy to the entire world, freely available to anyone with a receiver grounded into the Earth. Read that again, because it is the hinge the entire story turns on. A system that could not be metered. A current you could not bill for. Energy delivered through the planet itself to a copper rod in any backyard on Earth. Morgan's response is one of the most quietly devastating moments in the history of technology. Morgan was not a man who misunderstood money. He had spent his life building systems of control, railroads, steel, the consolidation of entire industries under structures he could own and direct. When he understood that Tesla's system was designed so that the power flowing out of it could not be measured, contained, or charged for, the proposal stopped making sense to him as an investment because it could not be one. The story passed down through Tesla's own accounts captures the heart of it in a single question. Where exactly do you put the meter on a system that delivers power to the whole Earth at once? There was no answer Tesla could give because the absence of a meter was the entire point. Morgan declined to provide another dollar, and he did more than that. As the most powerful financier in America, his withdrawal was a signal to every other potential investor that the project was finished. When Morgan stepped away from something, the rest of Wall Street read it as a verdict. No one else stepped in to replace him. The timeline from there is brutal. By 1903, Tesla was writing Morgan increasingly desperate letters, pleading for the funds to complete the work, even hinting at the full scope of what the system could do in the hope of reigniting Morgan's interest. It had the opposite effect. The more Tesla revealed, the less Morgan wanted any part of it. By 1905, the work at Wardenclyffe had effectively stopped. By 1906, the staff was gone, and Tesla was reported to have suffered a breakdown. The tower stood abandoned for over a decade, a 187-foot monument to a system that was never switched on at full power. In 1915, with debts mounting, Tesla signed the property over to the owner of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel to cover years of unpaid bills. And in 1917, the tower was demolished with explosives. Its steel sold for scrap during the First World War, reportedly for a fraction of what it had cost to build. The single most ambitious energy project of the age was reduced to rubble and sold by the pound. Now, here is where most tellings of this story stop. with the romantic image of a genius betrayed by a cold banker. But that version misses the part that actually matters to you, standing in your kitchen looking at your electric bill more than a century later. The question is not whether Morgan was cruel. The question is whether the system was structurally allowed to exist at all. And the answer reveals something about how energy works in this country that has not changed in 120 years. Think about what Morgan actually was. He was not just a banker who happened to fund an inventor. He was, more than any other single person, the architect of the modern American electrical industry itself. He had financed the 1892 merger of Edison General Electric and the Thomson-Houston Company that created General Electric, the company that would dominate American electrical manufacturing for the next century. His capital was woven through copper, through the physical wire that carried current from plant to home, through the entire architecture of generation and distribution that was being built out across the country in those exact years. Tesla did not just ask Morgan to fund a competitor to a product. He asked the chief financier of the wired, metered electrical grid to pay for the one invention that would render the wired, metered electrical grid obsolete. Morgan was not going to take a torch to the house he was still in the middle of building. The refusal was not personal, and in a strange way, it was not even short-sighted. From inside Morgan's position, it was the only rational decision available, and that is precisely why it is so chilling. The structure that killed Wardenclyffe is the part that survived. Because consider what the electrical industry became in the years immediately after the tower fell silent. A man named Samuel Insull, who had once been Thomas Edison's personal secretary and right hand, spent those exact years building the modern utility model out of Chicago. Insull's genius was not technical, it was structural. He understood that electricity delivery is a natural monopoly, that it makes no economic sense to run 5 competing companies' wires down the same street, and he turned that insight into a permanent business arrangement. The deal he helped pioneer is the deal that still governs your power bill today. A utility receives an exclusive franchise, the legal right to be the only seller of electricity in a defined geographic territory. In exchange, a government commission regulates the rate it can charge. But here is the mechanism that matters, and almost no one outside the industry understands it. That regulated rate is calculated to guarantee the utility a fixed percentage of profit on the value of its physical assets, its rate base. The more capital infrastructure a utility owns, the more wire and substations and transformers and transmission towers sit on its books, the larger the base on which it is legally entitled to earn a guaranteed return. The entire industry was rebuilt around a principle that is the exact mathematical opposite of wireless power. It was built to reward the wire. It was built to make owning more infrastructure the single most profitable thing a power company could do. Now lay Tesla's invention against that machine. A system with no wire to build, no service territory to control, no infrastructure to add to a rate base, and no meter to read at the end of the month. It is not merely that Wardenclyffe lost its funding. It is that Wardenclyffe was fundamentally incompatible with the business model that replaced it. There was no place to insert it. An invention whose entire value was the elimination of metered wired delivery had no role in an industry whose every dollar of profit was calculated on metered wired delivery. It was not defeated in a laboratory by a better experiment. It was made commercially impossible before it could ever be tested at full scale, and then the industry that made it impossible spent the next 100 years growing into the largest infrastructure system on the continent. And I want to be honest with you about the limits here, because the honesty is the entire point of doing this seriously. We do not actually know whether Tesla's full vision would have worked. This is not a small caveat, and anyone who skips past it is selling you something. Many physicists argue that transmitting usable amounts of power through the Earth across planetary distances runs into a basic, brutal problem. Energy radiating outward spreads and weakens with distance, and the losses at global scale would be catastrophic. Tesla's belief that the Earth's resonance would let him sidestep that loss and deliver power almost without attenuation has never been independently reproduced by anyone in the 120 years since. It is entirely possible, even probable in the view of many scientists, that the system would have failed on the physics regardless of Morgan, that the money simply ran out before reality could deliver the verdict. I'm not going to stand here and tell you Tesla had a finished, working free energy machine. and that wicked bankers buried a proven device. That is not what the historical record shows, and pretending otherwise would insult your intelligence. But here is what the record does show, and this is the part that should stay with you long after the video ends. The most credible inventor of his entire generation, backed by the single most powerful financier in the world, with the most famous architect in the country drawing the plans, building a real tower out of real steel on real American soil, was stopped. Not by a failed experiment, not by a disproven theory, but by a business question. The project did not die because someone proved in a laboratory that it could not work. It died years before it could ever be tested at full power because the man holding the checkbook realized that if it did work, no one could ever profit from it. The science was never given the chance to fail. The business model killed it first, and in the 120 years since, that exact calculation has never once been allowed to change. We are told the grid is the natural, inevitable, common-sense way to deliver electricity, as if it descended from physics itself. But the grid is a choice. It is a 19th century business model, locked into place by men who had enormous capital tied up in copper and steel, and defended ever since by a regulatory structure that, by its own internal logic, pays utilities more the more infrastructure they build. The Earth's electrical properties that Tesla measured in Colorado are not pseudoscience. The planet genuinely holds an enormous electrical potential between the ground and the upper atmosphere, on the order of hundreds of thousands of volts, a fact confirmed by NASA, by university atmospheric physics programs, and printed in standard reference texts on the Earth's electrical environment. The fundamental observations were never the problem. They were never disproven. They were simply made unprofitable. And then, they were buried under 100 years of wire and 100 years of a business model built to defend that wire. So what actually happened to the knowledge itself? It did not entirely disappear, and this is what makes the story sting rather than merely sadden. Tesla's patents are public and have always been public. United States Patent Number 1,119,632, apparatus for transmitting electrical energy, granted in 1914, describes the system in Tesla's own words, and you can read it online tonight for free. His Colorado Springs notebooks, with the measurements and the diagrams, were eventually published in full. The site at Shoreham still exists, after years of effort by preservationists. The laboratory building Stanford White designed was saved, and a science center now stands on the grounds where the tower once rose. The foundation Tesla poured is still in the earth. You can stand on the exact spot where the most ambitious attempt to end power bills in human history was sunk into the ground and then abandoned over one question about a meter. And researchers at institutions you would recognize have spent the last 20 years quietly confirming the broad strokes of the world Tesla was working in, that the global atmospheric electrical circuit is real, that the planet carries a continuous, measurable electrical potential, that energy genuinely surrounds us in the air and the ground at every moment. What no one has done, what no one has been seriously funded to do at the scale Tesla envisioned, is finish the work he started. And the reason is not technical mystery. The reason is the same question Morgan asked across that desk in 1904. It is the same question that would be asked today in any utility boardroom in America if someone walked in with a system that delivered power no one could measure. Where do we put the meter? That is the part that should sit with you, and it is bigger than one inventor. The unsettling thing about this story is not that a genius was betrayed. Inventors are betrayed constantly. The history of technology is a graveyard of brilliant people who died broke. The genuinely unsettling thing is that the reason this particular invention vanished is not some quirk of a crueler, older age that we have since outgrown. It is the identical reason it has never been revived. The incentive that killed it in 1904 is the same incentive operating right now, in the present, in every regulated utility on the continent. The technology was uncategorizable and unbillable in 1904, and it would be uncategorizable and unbillable today, and an industry whose every dollar depends on the meter has had 120 years and overwhelming resources to make sure that conversation simply never begins. The tower is gone. The steel was sold for scrap during a world war. The funding evaporated the moment its true purpose became clear. The The man who built it died nearly penniless in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel in 1943, having spent his final years feeding pigeons and dreaming of machines no one would fund. But the physics he measured is still measurable. The patents are still public and still readable. The foundation is still in the ground at Shoreham, and the single question that buried all of it, the question about the meter, is still the only thing standing between you and ever finding out whether he was right. So I will leave you with the same question Morgan asked, but turned completely around. If an invention could genuinely end your power bill, but no company on Earth could ever profit from selling it to you, do you honestly believe it would be allowed to reach your home today? I would genuinely like to know what you think, and your reasoning, because the answer you give says far more about the world we actually live in than it does about the world Tesla lived in. A lot of what this channel covers lives in exactly this gap, the inventions that were buried not because they failed in the lab, but because they could never be sold at the counter. If the lost history of energy independence is something you want to keep finding, subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure it does not vanish a second time.